Welcome to the Off-Grid Path podcast, and today I'm speaking to Seth Hughes, who's the incredibly talented individual behind the Instagram social channel called You're From Here. So let's get started. The Off-Grid Path podcast. Seth, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. A lot of people will probably know you from your Instagram kind of success, but what I kind of wanted to talk to you about was one, your lead up to that, and I don't want to kind of pigeonhole you into Instagram because it's far more than that, but that's definitely been a huge kind of, well, you've kind of launched into the stratosphere with that in a very quick short amount of time. And I find that really interesting from a kind of societal standpoint, just because social media can kind of be seen as a bit of a barometer for how society is doing, I guess, in that sense, and what it's craving and what it needs. So can you just talk about how you led up to starting on Instagram and social media? What were the steps to that kind of coming to fruition?
Lots of rage and anger initially. I had a very different winter last year. I just out of the blue, my dad died basically, and that was the catalyst to giving myself a break from everything, and I cancelled everything in my life. And that kind of birthed into a period of lots of stillness and lots of grief and lots of anger and frustration towards what I deem to be very anti-human kind of cultural systems that we found ourselves in. And that made me really it made me really want to not be associated with a lot of aspects of our current system. And it left me feeling very polarized, really wanting to big feeling of wanting to run away, and that came from a few different places, but largely came from this feeling that I didn't want to fall victim to a lot of the things just passively being part of our culture allows you to fall victim to. Kind of personal health problems, mental health problems, financial things, working for people that you don't really want to be working for, living an unaligned life, all sorts of stuff. And there was virtually every aspect of our culture I didn't want to be a part of. I no longer feel quite that polarized, which is a relief. It was quite a tiring headspace to be in. But what that birthed into was really delving in and learning ways of lots of self-sufficiency, I suppose. That's where it started. That's not where it is now, but that's where it started. And I started to realize that there was so much wild food around me, so much kind of forageable food around me that I just didn't know about, and no one knew. I mean, people do, don't get me wrong, people do know, but not in my circles really. No one really knew that much. And I didn't have someone just close and older to me that I could just go and ask about what I could eat from the wild. And I've just found that bizarre that that not enough people knew. So I almost went on a bit of a rampage to teach it all to myself and then teach other people, because I felt like I had to be a conduit of that information.
So would you say that was a birthed out of the kind of necessity and need to do it, or the passion, or a bit of both? Because to learn something intensely, and I guess it's a process and you're always learning, but to get into something there has to be a degree of passion, I would say. Mm-hmm. or was that born out of you're talking about the kind of necessity and that need, and that kind of need to do it. Is that a kind of mix between passion and need, or?
Yeah, I would say it is a mix between passion and need in some sense. It's never need in the sense of that I need to, like, I think need in the context of wild food implies that that was what I was living off, and I wasn't. I felt like I needed to do it to regain some traction and purpose in my life, and to a degree, I still feel that. Like what learning about foraging and wild food represented to me was kind of a slow alleviation and unpicking out of a system that I didn't want to be a part of. Kind of plant by plant by plant. I thought if I could build up this knowledge, not just to do with food, but that's where I started. It feels as if, yeah, the need was a purpose need rather than a hunger need. Let's put it that way.
Sure.
And I think one of the things I feel least sure of in the future of our kind of culture and species, and probably not planet, but culture and species, is probably food security, and not just any food, but true food of nutritional value. And I have decreasing faith for a lot of standard food systems. And I decided that I just wanted to have some kind of idea of an alternative method to that. The point at which maybe supermarket food or just any buyable food becomes less and less nutrient dense. I wanted to have an understanding of another option, that I didn't get thrown in the deep end straight away. And I still feel like I'm on that journey. I don't have loads and loads of faith in systems that I feel don't have particularly, I don't feel have human interests at heart, or human health at heart, maybe, or as their foundation. And I just wanted to kind of take those matters into my own hands for the sake of myself and family and community to a degree as well, and just be like, I have to know this information. Humans should know this. So that's where that started from. But yeah, that was just the very first step, really. Initially, it was birthed out of like a craving of purpose and a frustration and an anger that I didn't know this stuff already.
So you're talking that, I mean, it sounds like the trauma of your dad was almost the catalyst for this. Am I right in saying that? Would that be fair to say?
Big time, yeah.
Yeah.
He was the catalyst for allowing myself space rather than for the actual thing.
Sure.
It was by giving myself the time that it then birthed into that.
So it's interesting, because hearing you talk about that, and in hindsight, you're quite clear on what happened to you, how that made you feel, and you're quite conscious of that. At the time, did you have that same kind of awareness, and were you conscious of what was happening? Were you kind of kind of looking at that from outside eyes, at yourself essentially, and evaluating that as in real time, or is this, are you talking now, is this very much hindsight?
No, I think I knew it at the time. I don't think I knew that I would come out of that period. I felt definitely that I would be kind of hell bent on running away from the system forever. And I don't feel quite like that anymore. And that was a necessary step for me. And I really love that character in me. And I find him an incredibly valuable voice that occupies a bit of my brain.
Sure.
But he was really guiding the ship for those few months, and he's not guiding the ship anymore. And so I think I did know it. I definitely knew, I did have the clarity of it at the time, but I just maybe thought that I would never come out of that.
So with that, I don't really want to use the term you've kind of filled a void. I guess there might have been an element of filling a huge gap, with your father passing. but it sounds like there's been massive trauma, and I know it's not as simple as this, but there's to put it bluntly, and I think a lot down to your, testament to you. There's been huge benefits to that. That's probably not phrased in the best possible way, but I think you know what I'm saying. In that you've come out in a immensely positive way. Lots of positive things have come out of that, which is, I guess, gives some. Which I don't really know the best way to put this, but I mean it must be comforting.
Just say it however you want to say it.
From such a horrific trauma, because I was in not a similar position, but my dad passed away when I was 12, and I didn't, I still probably haven't really dealt with that. I was at a very youngish age and not mature enough in a sense, certainly from a sort of self-awareness point of view at that point to really deal with it, and probably haven't dealt with it now, which is probably a sign to say I'm still not mentally mature enough to deal with that. But it seems like you've dealt with it in the best possible way you really could. I wouldn't even say it's textbook, because it's beyond textbook. It's really taking that to the next level, and you've taken something awful with no warning and turned it into something beautiful, essentially. I'd say. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, it's fair to say. I appreciate you saying that. That's really, really lovely words. I think one of the unique aspects of mine and my father's relationship was that we spoke a lot about death, and we spoke a lot about various elements of spirituality and the death and rebirth of all things, not just humans, and I always imagined that all those conversations I had with my dad about those things would find us one day sat at a funeral winking at each other from across the room and kind of like not taking the whole thing too seriously. And that's kind of what I had in my mind's eye off the back of those conversations. And it was such a gift that I could have those conversations with my dad. The irony, of course, is that all those conversations prepared me for his own death, not someone else's.
Yeah,
and
sure.
And there was there's a big part of me that had, these kinds of topics I'd explored so extensively with my dad, So, of course, I miss him, But there's almost the element of I picture talking to him across the veil a little bit about these things still, And they, I just don't find it that sad.
Well, which is amazing. I mean, that's an amazing place to be, and I'm sure he'd be immensely proud of what you have achieved up until now, and I'm sure we'll go on to do amazing things. So with that, there was a point. I mean, what some people might not realise is that you are a filmmaker by kind of profession, I guess. Filmmaker, DOP, cinematographer. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
At what, but
any of those, yeah,
and I would
also none of them.
But I mean, I guess a storyteller first and foremost. I mean, I think you probably won't talk about this, and I'm going to say, I mean, you are. For those of you who don't know, I also am a filmmaker. I have been in the past and very much kind of fluctuate with it. But Seth is incredible at what he does. Like he is, he's always had a unique eye. I mean, it really it is amazing what you do, and there's definitely an element of jealousy from my side, because the work you put out is incredible, and you haven't, I've very much been a victim of just. Everyone gets inspiration from everything. There's always going to be an element. I've got filmmakers that I admire, and I take bits from that, and I always try and do my own thing. But there's always an element of inspiration coming from somewhere. But the stuff you're putting out, and if you haven't seen it, I'll put a link down in the descriptions below to Seth's work, because it is incredible. And you've always kind of, it seems to be that you've always just not follow. It's very easy to follow a certain style, or because you think, well, that's going to be six, well, that's what people are going to want to hire me for, but you've stuck to your own style, it seems, and not being afraid to kind of think outside the box and go for something that's slightly off center, which is incredibly difficult to do, especially in the freelance world of film, because you've got to think about making money at the end of the day, and and being able to live, and in this day and age, we do need money to live. So that's a very difficult thing to do, and what you've done is exactly that. And I think with partially some of your success on Instagram, I mean, forget the message that you're putting out, but from one kind of cinematographer to another, the visual aspect and the storytelling aspect is incredible. And I mean, it's just so spot on and brilliant. And I just want to, from my own selfish point of view, I just want to kind of just go into that a little bit and your process behind that, because
let's do that. That sounds great.
Yeah, well, I just find it fascinating, that side of it, because I know I've heard you talk about it in the past. When you were starting, you had a kind of gap, right, between a few jobs, and you had about a month off. Mm-hmm. And so you thought, right, I'm going to give this a go, but you're going to treat it like a job, which is a great outlook for it, and really take it seriously. So can you just talk us through that process? You're right now, you don't have an Instagram account. You're starting from scratch. You've got a month off, right, between jobs.
Yeah. I was almost on the other extreme end of that. It's kind of I've had a very on-off relationship with social media most of my life. Largely hate it. In that period where I started my Instagram, and those few months prior during that grieving process, I actually had it like a Nokia phone as well. So I didn't even have an iPhone. And I was kind of adamant that I didn't want to be on social media or even have anything to do with kind of like tech and things like that. My plan was to also, along with this foraging journey, was to also piece by piece unpick myself from the world of technology as well. And these, retrospectively, they're quite naive things to say, but I still resonate with the feeling. And every day in that kind of process I was going through last winter, I was kind of trying to feel through myself what my next steps were going to be, and I couldn't land on anything. I really didn't know what I wanted to do, and I haven't trained in anything else other than cameras and videography and anything. I didn't go to uni, anything like that. I don't have any qualifications in anything else. I've never worked in any other industry. And it's like, you could just try social media. I know you don't like it, but just give it a go. You could see what happens, And if you're going to do it properly. And like, you've got the camera gear, you've got the skills, you've got the editing software. Most people who want to start something up like this have to have quite a big initial investment of their own time to learn, and camera gear and editing software and all that kind of stuff. And I didn't have to go through that process. So I was just like, just fuck it. We'll just give it a crack, see what happens. And if you're going to do it, just do it properly. So I watched a few videos about what social media was after at the time, what kind of performed well. And I was like, I couldn't believe they were the things I was researching off the back of not wanting to be on social media at all. It felt like such a switch, such a polarity. But what I found was that there were all these kind of cases of people who'd like really, really quickly grown an Instagram in a month to like 20 or 30,000 followers by posting something every day that taught someone something, that provided value. That was basically, it was like a short video in a Reels form every day, consistently. But the most important thing was that you teach someone something. So I just committed every day, no matter how small the thing I was teaching, pick something and just teach it and not think about it, and then just get it out there and start again the next day. And it didn't even take a month. Like 2 weeks later, I had, I don't know, 20,000 followers or something, and it was so mental. And then one of my videos went viral, and then that was it. Really, one of the videos went viral, and it got me up to like 100K within the first 6 weeks or something.
Yeah.
Maybe not quite that much, but it was like, I can't really remember anymore. But one day I got 15,000 followers. It was so ridiculous. It's
quite a leap going from a few months earlier to a Nokia phone to then. I mean, I'm sure your notifications are turned off, but that's what's that like? What's that? I've had my forays in the past with kind of minimal tech, and it's definitely peaks and troughs, and you kind of go back and forth, and I do things in the extremes mostly, and never really found a nice balance point. It's either all or nothing. But how does that feel when that happens?
It was really overwhelming at first, it was unusual to be on that side of Instagram. The things I found addictive about social media prior to that were just the scrolling element, not necessarily the validation element. Like a couple of times when I'd released a film and it got a bit of traction, like a surf film or something, and maybe I'd get a few followers then, but nothing even close to what this new Instagram was like. So it was weird to be addicted to the validation end rather than the scrolling end. The consumption, like not the consumption, the validation or the likes
Sure.
and the comments and all that kind of stuff. And it's incredibly addicting. No one's immune to that.
Yeah.
And I also knew that it was quite such an interesting period of my life. Those few weeks, I was probably never going to get it quite like that again. Never was going to be able to see that huge spike of followers again. So I just kind of indulged in it. I just kind of let myself watch it happen, because I knew it wouldn't last forever. And it's super intense. Humans shouldn't have that. It's not for the human brain, that kind of stuff. And it completely fried me,
Yeah, and I can
Put it
imagine
down for a bit again.
there's a fact, and I'm probably going to completely butcher this because I can't remember the exact fact, but essentially it's something like, back in the 1950s compared to now, a human in their entire lifetime in the 1950s will consume the same amount as a 10-year-old. So up to the age of 10, you'll consume, and it's probably younger than that now. But by 10 years old, you would have consumed as much in everything, as much as a full life of an adult.
Wow. In terms of like media and entertainment and stuff like that.
In terms of everything, the amount of information that is being thrown at us on a day-to-day basis.
Okay, yeah.
When you look at the kind of advancements of tech and kids on iPads, and I'm not saying that's a terrible thing, but we are just consuming information all of the time. So that's that could be listening to a podcast in your car, whereas before you might not have even listened to the radio. There might have been nothing, but you
might just have nothing for a bit.
But there is just information just you're downloading all the time, and evolution hasn't moved that quickly. We haven't prepared for that in such a short amount of time. So it's really interesting in what our brain and consciousness can actually take, because we haven't prepared for that. Our brains haven't prepared for that fully. They haven't prepped for that amount of information, which I'm sure is probably some answers there to some huge problems in life. But what's nice, because I have a love-hate relationship with social media, as does probably everyone on the planet. But I use YouTube's probably the biggest platform for me, because like you, I've never been to university or college, but I enjoy learning, and YouTube is an incredible resource for learning. So the side of social media, I mean, I think the thing that you're doing is fantastic, because you are providing knowledge in a really lovely way. And I know you're talking about potentially getting a YouTube channel soon, which I assume would be more longer form content, which I think would be amazing. YouTube's a fantastic platform, and I'm really excited to see what you do with that, because Instagram and TikTok's all very short form, which is great to get that kind of brief bit of knowledge, but to go longer form would be really exciting. But so there's benefits to it, but there's also the classic kind of a lot of shit online that really doesn't benefit people. So I guess have you had a kind of conscious decision to make valuable content, or content that gives value to someone?
I've written like almost a manifesto of what things, where my thresholds are for things, because the nature of the space is that it sucks you in. Like, you can have all the clarity in the world if you take 3 months off it, and it doesn't take long for that clarity you get a bit foggy, because you get foggy from the actual consumption, You get foggy from the various chemicals that are released by watching it and by being part of it. You get clouded by opinions of over 100,000 people. It's like it's quite gnarly. So you gotta find ways to maintain that clarity. And I keep kind of referencing that almost manifesto page and trying to put any video I make through that filter.
Nice.
Feels almost like a part. I don't know, like a yeah, like a password, like a fail-safe password or something, something I can keep referencing so that it kind of keeps me aligned, even if I'm in the midst of like a big social media point in my life,
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's hard. It's hard, because you get pulled in all sorts of directions and you get influenced by so many things, and that's also half the fun of it, I suppose.
Yeah, I think it is, and I find it fascinating. I'm on and I'm very honest with myself in terms of I for my channel Off-Grid Path on YouTube. Part of the reason to start it was because I used YouTube. I was renovating a kind of static caravan. I had no experience whatsoever at all. I mean, literally nothing, and it was YouTube that gave me the skills to do.
Yeah,
everything
all that information is there, isn't it?
In the cabin. It was just fantastic, and you can stop, and it's in your pocket, and you can like, well, I don't know how to do this, so I'm going to look it up right now, and then you've got it. So part of the reason for me was to give back a little bit, because it's quite a specific thing. But I did hear, and there's lots of people that want to do similar. But also part of it was to try and see if I can earn money. And that's very much part of it for me, because I'm trying to kind of still figure out this work-life balance, general life balance, so part of it was to see if it's possible to monetize that and earn money. So there's kind of two prongs to it. So I really get a big kick out of the strategy side of social media and YouTube and that side of it, and I enjoy making videos. But
you got huge TikTok and stuff as well, don't you? And a big.
I did a very. I didn't.
YouTube.
I haven't kind of got onto Instagram, but I did an exactly similar thing with you. I said, right, I'm going to start TikTok, and I did my research. I've sat down for a good month and watched YouTube videos, the same as you. It's like, how do you get 10,000 followers in a month? And, different. And I took a few different things from a few different videos, and I thought, right, this is it. I'm going to do this for 30 days. And if it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. And like you, treat it as a full-time job. I edited 100, cut down videos, so I had 100 to go to do 3 a day for a month, and
wow.
And it worked, and it came out something like 80,000 in a month. It's almost not difficult. There's a formula in a sense, but
there is a formula.
I guess the content you're putting out has to resonate with people. But I part of me enjoys that. But like you're saying, there's a weird balance. You can't. It's such an odd world, and it's always conflicting all the time, because right now I'm in a situation where I'm on YouTube, and I think, right, okay, I need to put out some content. I need to do this. And it's like, oh God, this is starting to feel a bit weird, because I'm just scrounging for content, and I was like, this is not how I wanted it to go. So kind of taken a step back, and I'm long story short, starting another channel that I'm dictating how I want it to happen, and hopefully it works, but it might not work. But if it doesn't work, it's not right for me. That's the bottom line. It has to be able to work for me and create a balance, because I've noticed myself slowly and subtly falling into that trap of like, oh, I have to put out content. But I've noticed with yours, it's interesting. I mean, I kind of diverting here, but I'll just finish what I'm saying. But I've noticed with yours, you've calmed down on Instagram, and it's very much quality over quantity. And I guess you've reached this point where you're like, right, I've built this kind of following. Now I can just make sure that I'm putting out content every now and again, but it's quality content. You don't seem to be worried about, God, I haven't posted in 2 days. I need to, how is that for you now? How are you managing that?
There definitely is the voice in the back of my head sometimes that's like, you should post more, whatever that means. And doesn't take me that long to rationalize that. One of the things in my kind of manifesto or whatever is that I just don't want to be adding to the pile of crap. So the moment that I put something out there that feels like it's adding to the pile of crap, rather than providing value and maybe helping someone get off social media or see the world outside social media, then there was no point in me starting the social media in the first place, and I may as well go back to my brick phone and try something else.
Sure.
So that is one of the kind of the filters I put that through. And yeah, I'm looking forward to maybe another period of my life where I make a video every day for a month just to see what happens, and I don't do anything else, and I commit to do something of value every day, and I really get honed into that headspace.
Yeah.
But until then, I think I'd rather post something every couple of weeks that really feels like of high quality, because I think that that's what people then expect as well. I think it reached a point. It seems to have reached a point where like there's enough on my feed of high enough quality that exciting things kind of come to me a lot of the time now.
Nice.
And that I don't necessarily have to be posting every day to get people interested in my page.
Mm-hmm.
And like I find someone they'll click on my page that doesn't follow me, and then they'll go through and they'll see all like this bank of videos, and they'll like each one. And it doesn't matter if I haven't posted for 2 weeks at that point. There's like a bank of high quality things that I'm really proud of there. And I'd rather just kind of keep it like that, I suppose, more of like a portfolio rather than like an endless kind of thread of whatever kind of tickles my fancy on the day. But yeah, I mean, different techniques work for different people. That's not the only way. That's just what I've liked to maintain, because I'd like down the track just to have all my videos on there of that same kind of quality, really.
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't want to pigeonhole you into something, but one question I really wanted to ask was, just have to go over, I've got it written down here, which was basically about, people do degrees in science communication. So, we'll study for 3 years to communicate science to the masses in order to change something. So whether that's environment or whatever it might be. Mm-hmm. What is, you seem to have cracked that in a month. So
maybe. I don't know if I cracked it.
It's really, I just find it really fascinating because the psychology behind it is really interesting. So what did you, when you were thinking, these videos resonate with people massively, and like I was saying earlier, it's like social media is kind of a barometer for how society is doing. So people have obviously consumed this information that you're putting out and want it and need more and are hungry for more. So was that a thought beforehand? Was there any, in your storytelling, is there any kind of strategy in there? Was there a thought of, well, how's this going to come across? How's someone going to consume this information? Have you thought about how you're making those videos and how it's going to come across, in the best possible way, or how much work goes into that?
There's definitely a few weeks of script writing before each video.
Yeah,
for sure, to kind of sculpt that thing down into a minute or a minute and a half. It's like an idea that I have in my head that might come out as a 10-minute piece of talking that I then have to get down into a 1-minute process that requires a level of sculpting and whittling.
Yeah.
So I definitely think about it a lot in those terms. But I think for me, there's a few different layers to it. So if foraging is like one of these layers, and you can make videos about foraging to get someone who maybe is already interested in foraging to go and forage that plant. But the videos around ideas and nature reconnection and maybe the psychology of it sits under here, which might get someone to be interested in foraging. So I know I'm not a master forager. I haven't done it for very long, but I know the thought process that got me to foraging.
Nice. Yeah.
And I feel confident that I can relay information about how you can go through the various maybe thought processes or ideologies to get to a point where you think foraging might be worth your time, So I think maybe I'm starting to learn, maybe that's more where my skills lie. There's people out there who are, been foragers for decades and decades and decades. And I love learning about that kind of stuff. And I will continue to learn as much as I can about wild food and all sorts of things, and shelter building and kind of sustainable buildings and like you can go in every direction, wild movement and barefoot running and everything. I love all of it.
Yeah.
But like, I think there's also a place for people to be like someone who bridges a gap,
Mm-hmm.
to take someone who maybe has never thought of themselves as someone who's like into nature or let alone foraging, but doesn't even feel like they're the kind of person who enjoys walking around in the woods, to being like, no, walking around in the woods is like really normal human stuff. Like you probably do love it. And maybe running them through maybe just jogging various people's minds to get to a point. Like, I don't think we're going to go through any kind of major ecological changes until we remind people that it's this thing that we call nature is not like a separate entity. Like we don't get to kill nature and be alive, that's not going to happen that way. We can't keep designing our way out of this problem, and there's going to be, no matter what kind of world we end up with, it's going to have to be one that has aligned with the vast majority of natural processes, in my opinion. Otherwise we're just fighting an uphill battle the whole time.
Yeah.
And I think that to get more people to that place, I feel it's worth reminding people of their connection to that.
Yeah.
And that to me is in many ways actually more important than just teaching someone about like something to forage,
Yeah. It's interesting.
Even
your wording, is like you said there, to it's about reminding someone about their connection with nature. You could have said it's about convincing someone, but even your wording is very well put, whether you're conscious of that or not. It's remembering rather than convincing someone. It's that kind of remembering of this is how it is. And my partner's doing a master's in land restoration and ecology, and we have conversations all the time, and she's she's not so much into the science side, but she really appreciates the importance of that. But that's not necessarily what changes people's point of view, or it's not so much call to action, because there are, if we are flooded with constant data, which is horrific, but we're almost immune to that now, we're kind of numb to any stats because we just hear them on a day by day basis, and they don't have the same kind of effect. And also it's speaking a different language, and so we were talking about, well, what constitutes change, how can you change something, and ultimately it's the people that change things. And then it's a case of, well, how do you get people to change things? And that comes down to essentially science communication, if to call it a name, which is getting people on board basically, or making people realize. And that's kind of, I find that quite an interesting subject, because like I was saying before, people study a degree in science communication to specifically do that. But what you have done is, in a very short amount of time, is you're doing that. You're doing that with quite dramatic effect, and what you're doing is resonating with people, and almost creating a movement. But the fact that you've gained such a strong following, and it's not just a numbers game. You see with your comments, people are passionate about this. People have thanked you. Like, we got some incredibly lovely comments, hundreds and hundreds, just reels of comments of people kind of thanking you and saying, oh, this has really changed how I am and what I'm doing. So I guess I don't know if you've really sat down and thought about what you're doing, and really kind of analyze, because what you're doing is working. It's changing people, and that's really interesting, because that's the hardest thing to do, and you seem to have kind of hit the nail on the head. So I don't know if you've I don't know how much you've thought into the future, or whether you do, or whether you've kind of thought about where you're going with this at all, or what your aims are for the future.
I think about it fairly frequently, I think. I didn't initially when I started the channel. It was just about starting the channel. And now I've got a bit more breathing space around it, and I'm not in the constant flow of uploads. So I'm definitely thinking more about the future. but I couldn't say I know what that is.
Mm.
Um, the the channel's really shown me or reminded me of the importance of, or the potency of storytelling. You know, that's all everything is.
Yeah.
Nothing changes without without a narrative, without the story that runs in people's heads, and that's the fabric of our world. It seems to me. Um, you know, you can break things down into like infinite smaller and smaller chunks with using a scientific method, and there's definitely a place for that. Don't get me wrong. I'm not. That's fantastic for many things, but I think for changing the ideas of people, that doesn't happen through data and showing them lots of like evidence about something. It comes through feeling and story. And I think whatever direction I go in, I think it will be more that way inclined. You know, like seems like there's two ways to kind of dive deeper and deeper into, I don't even know what the word is. It's no coincidence that science keeps proving indigenous cultures right. And it seems like there's often two ways to get to the same place. You can keep breaking things down into smaller and smaller chunks through scientific method and with finer and finer instruments. And that's fantastic. But a lot of that stuff just proves the ancient wisdom in the first place. And the stiller you get and the more in line with nature you get, you often arrive at a lot of these same places that science takes many years to get to. And I think those two things in conjunction are a very, very powerful combination if they're used appropriately. I feel sometimes that the intuitive, ancient, indigenous human approach maybe is less resource heavy. And there might be more room for rapid change through investigating that side of things and then telling stories from that position rather than often leaning on science and data to convince people that we need to kind of connect with our ecosystem or with the wildlife and, you know, and with kind of climate statistics and all that kind of stuff. And there is a place for those things, and I really value that the people that do that stuff, and I think it's very important particularly on a political level. I don't think that's where my strengths are, and I think really needs to there needs to be the story element that kind of comes up alongside that competes, reminds people from their heart why we do this, why we want to do this, not why we need to do this, why it's going to be so much better for us when we all do, when we connect back to the world and back to the nature and just the nature of existence, really.
So, talking from touching on sort of indigenous roots, and I mean we've got kind of like the obvious examples in other countries. The UK specifically, would you say we have indigenous roots in the UK? Kind of in terms of that, because maybe this is just, I mean, for me, there's just not a lot of information. You've got, you know, when people talk about indigenous communities, I think people's minds will generally go to Canada or kind of Mesoamerica type, you know, or the kind of obvious ones. But the UK seems to have a bit of a muddled or very difficult history to trace in terms of that. Would you say, or is it? I've got very little knowledge on that on UK kind of ancestral kind of history, or whether we actually have an indigenous culture in the UK.
Yeah, it's a tough question. Whatever it is today, it's
far removed.
Yeah, it's been swamped by kind of imperialism and colonialism that much longer ago. You know, and we are incredibly lucky and incredibly blessed to still have the remaining patches of indigenous culture around the world. You know, we're pretty lost as it is, but we would be completely lost without that.
Sure.
And they are the wisdom keepers of what it means to be human right now. And they are serving as a reminder of how we reintroduce indigenous ways back into our own land. I think that there is definitely indigenous culture in this country, and it's beneath a lot of layers, and it's quite hard to find the traces of it. It certainly exists. It's just been that colonial imperial kind of invasion style happened to Western Europe just that much longer ago.
Yeah.
So the kind of the pagan indigenous cultures were, by the time Western Europe then went on to colonize the rest of the world and wipe out the indigenous cultures of the Americas and Australia and Asia and all these kind of places around the world, the indigenous cultures of Europe had been like engulfed that much longer before that I think we forget that we ever were that.
Sure.
But we were absolutely all part of kind of pagan indigenous communities, tribes and cultures from Europe. And the remnants of those are really, I think, in my opinion, really starting to kind of poke back through again, and people are seeing the value in those.
I completely agree. It's just,
but it's hard to find, you know?
Yeah, it's a real shame that it's very difficult to find kind of clear information on that, really. I mean, and like you said, that is because of our history of kind of repeated major events of different occupation of the British Isles and you know, over time, and churches getting buried over pagan sites and all sorts. I mean, it's there, you know, it's clear to see, but it's difficult to find any information. And like you said, you know, we're lucky that there's other indigenous cultures around the world that are still passing on really incredibly valuable knowledge. I just wasn't. That's what I just thought I'd ask, because I haven't looked into it a huge amount. Just wondering if there was, you know, any good knowledge getting passed down from a you know, this kind of geographical area in terms of. Because I know you've got Sami people, you know, in Finland and things like that. So there are pockets of kind of indigenous culture in kind of mainland Europe, I guess. But yeah, so I guess it's just difficult to find in the UK.
For me, it's also what I was talking about before. You know, there's two ways to kind of skin a cat in that sense. That on the one hand, you can look for more and more evidence that suggests that there was an indigenous culture here, and on the other hand, it doesn't take much inward looking to know that there absolutely was one.
Yeah,
you know?
Right.
There couldn't have not been. So I think that's another place where story is really important for me. You know, behaving as if there still is a thriving indigenous culture in this archipelago of islands helps me reconnect more and more to nature. And I don't know exactly what that looks like because we've lost it so many years ago, you know. But I could spend lots of my time doing lots of research and reading more and more about it. But I think I'm going to get much closer to the feeling of indigeneity through foraging, through nature reconnection, through ceremony, through ancient practices, and through much more embodied things to get to a point where I feel connected to the land and living in reciprocity with the land in a more indigenous way, rather than reading more and more about the thing, which is quite a Western European academic style of doing anything. Like our idea of being good at something is just to have read loads about it, but not be it. And I just want to be it, not really read it. And I think what we're talking about right now is being a human, and you don't need to read anything. You can just be one if you look into yourself enough. and work out how we would have fit into the ecosystem. And I definitely have I'm still very, very dominated by Western European culture and mindset and white privilege. I probably will never let go of all of those things. But I don't think I unpick that through endless reading of books. I think I unpick that through nature reconnection and embodied practice.
Nice. That's a pretty solid answer. Totally. I would agree with you. And you're doing just that, which is amazing. I am conscious of time, and there's one question I really wanted to ask. Well, I think I'm going to ask you the question of what it means to be off grid, and by that, I think a lot of people's perceptions of off grid are kind of moving out in the sticks, and certainly now at the moment there seems to be, the obsession of buying some land and building a simple dwelling or whatever, and living kind of in the sticks and having a small holding. And I think I've heard you have a different view on that, which is quite refreshing. But what's your take on that, on kind of I guess the meaning of being off grid in modern times?
It's a good question. I like it. I think, well, firstly, that there's no such thing. And the real grid is the ecosystem and community, and there's no getting away from that. And I think often being off grid has, well, definitely the spaces that I've come onto the idea of off grid living has a lot of kind of self-sufficiency stuff built in, and that's fantastic. But I think living off grid to me now means that you have found sustainable ways to resource yourself so that you can be a foundation of trust for other people in your community and a foundation of resources for other people in your community. I don't think everyone running off to their own patches and doing it individually themselves is completely the answer. I think it's a great place to start, and I think people who are doing that right now are pioneers of a lot of those things, and they'll hold a lot of very, very valuable information about how we can do that collectively, so we're not all reliant on corrupt systems. But that is, to me, really just getting back on the grid of the appropriate ways to live on Earth, and back onto the grids of the original ecosystems, and it has to have a community element to me now. I think for a long time I really like this foraging stuff, and this anti-system feeling really wanted me to be completely self-reliant, and my idea of success was just to run off and live in the woods, and now I'm realizing that that's not sustainable, because humans don't live by themselves, and it has to be always back in service of community and ecosystem to me now, and anything I do has to be in service of both of those things, largely as my overall trajectory anyway, and I think that's what off-grid living means to me now.
Yeah, nice. So that's kind of no man is an island. And I think a lot of, and again through social media, and I'm probably guilty of this as well, but that kind of romanticizing the cabin in the woods, which is a fantastic thing, but there's a other side to that, and I some people do live by themselves and live a great life, but I think you are right in community is absolute key. And I think what I've heard you talk about is actually this kind of town or village or even city model, although kind of dysfunctional right now, can be an incredible place to start a community. I think you were talking about that the infrastructure's there. It's all, you don't have to do anything. You don't have to put in that work to create the infrastructure. But right now it's not working. So how, if that's your kind of how would that look? How would a kind of how would that work in a town from your point of view?
I don't know. I think right now there are lots of bits that still do work, particularly on the social side for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
And the town that I live in, I think there are plenty of things that do work in community here, and I don't think you need a clean slate necessarily to shift that into the kind of world that we want to live in. But I think first and foremost, a lot of these things come back to food for me, I think. And I think people having just a much closer relationship with food and having the skills to be able to either grow or forage or hunt in their local environment, to be able to sustain not just themselves but maybe neighbours who aren't able to do that, and be able to kind of pull your weight in the community, so then other people can do their bit, you know. And I think that sharing element, I think, has to become very important.
Yeah.
But from a systemic overall kind of energy level, I don't know. I really don't know what the answer is. The only answer I almost can guarantee that sits well with me is just to use less, and to be less reliant on a lot of these things that have become very normal but maybe aren't that normal in human life and human community, and prepare for times when maybe those things get turned off or taken away from you, you know.
Yeah.
Like I'm at the moment, I feel like I'm building the foundations of a community around me for the point at which I can't have a car anymore, and I see that as quite a reasonable future. You know, I'm very aware of the day that the fuel runs out and I don't get to drive my car, and although I'm not getting rid of my car this week, I'm laying down the foundations and the paving stones so that the point at which that goes, it doesn't feel like a big blow to me anymore. Like I've got the things I need around me, and I think kind of going through that adaptation process prior to someone pulling the rug out from underneath you is a way to make like yourself and communities more resilient.
Yeah.
But it's a big task. I don't know what all the answers are.
Yeah, it is. It's a strange one, isn't it? With that, 'cause I think you're quite right in having that kind of I don't know if preparedness is the right word, but you know, you're conscious of that maybe being a thing. And I'm similar in certain senses, and I guess in many ways I've kind of lived my life in and this, you see, I've got conflicting views on this, but I've kind of lived a way where I don't have that far to fall. You know, I know that sounds very negative and pessimistic in life, but you know, I try to live in a way where not that I maybe have the ability to earn millions of pounds, but I'm not necessarily interested in that. But it's more, you know, if everything goes, I'm kind of it's not a huge fall for me. You know, I don't have far to fall, and although there'll be points, you know, in my life that would be a blow, generally I'll be all right compared to. And let's take the very stereotypical example, because I can't think of anything else right now, but you know, someone in the city that may be in finance that earns X amount of hundreds of thousands of pounds a year, if that gets taken away from them, they've got a long way to fall to readjust in their life. And I am conflicted by that, because I don't, you know, part of me doesn't mind kind of having that in the back of my head, but then at the same time it's like, am I holding myself back? But then what would I be trying to achieve? I don't really know. But I know one of the really nice things about the cabin for me, and it's always been the small things. It's never a major thing, but we're heated. The only sort of source of heating is a log burner. And the first time I got a delivery of wood, it was completely unexpected, but I felt hugely wealthy. I had spent a couple of hours stacking the wood, and there it all was. Like behind you, you've got this huge stack of wood, and you think, that's tangible, you know, that's heat, that's my heat, and I can cook on that, I can boil water on that if I need to. So all of a sudden you've got this tangible wealth. It's not by any means our kind of definition of wealth, but without knowing that was going to happen, I felt incredibly wealthy, and that was kind of the start of you know, this kind of off-grid, not that I'm completely off-grid, but there was a feeling of security there that was kind of contradictory because it's not your stereotypical security. But being in control of your own energy usage means that you are conscious of how much you're using because you see it. You know, especially with wood, you see how much you're using. Whereas I guess in conventional terms, you know, using energy that's just coming in the form of electricity through a plug, you can't see that. You can't see how much you're using. So that there's a huge disconnect there for you know how much we're consuming because we can't see it. We can't physically see that, you know, that amount of energy. But just having that just slight, and I'm not talking, you know, I'm quite realistic. I've got my luxuries that I love, but just having that slight resistance in life is hugely beneficial for me, and it's in a very small way where I've got to go outside and chop some wood and bring some wood in. It's not a huge task and I enjoy it, but it's not as simple as waking up to a hot, you know, the heating's programmed and it's on and you're waking up to it. So you just got to put in a tiny bit of work. It's that little bit of resistance, but it's has huge benefits in my life. And it sounds like a small thing, but it's great to be able to be in control of that. You know, so I see what you mean in terms of the kind of preparedness side. I've kind of gone off on a tangent there, but that kind of preparedness, and like you're saying with the towns, you can, and what I've heard you say before is that you can walk everywhere in a town, which, so I just really liked your when you were talking about it, because I think it was on another podcast. I've never really heard that view. Everyone's always been quite negative about towns. You know, in that kind of sphere of living off grid, it's like, well, I want to get away. Everyone's trying to get away. You're trying to get away, trying to get quieter. And actually, you've kind of looked at that and said, well, it's really not that bad. In fact, there's a lot of benefits, and probably more benefits to living in the middle of nowhere. You've got your community. You've got everywhere's within walking distance. You've got that possibility of sharing or trading and coming together as a community. And actually, you know, I've always been in the mindset of like, I just want to be on my own, you know, which is,
it's a reasonable want thing to want, you know. It
is, but you know, there's an element of running.
Culture, you know,
yeah. But I just really liked that. I liked that idea because I've never really considered that. It's always been kind of running away from that, and you kind of got me thinking, going, actually, yeah, you know, it's very easy to see the negatives.
It's both, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's both. And I think we're at a point where so many human needs aren't being met across the board. You know, the most basic things like non-polluted air, water that isn't filled with chemicals, real food that's not ridiculously expensive, being able to afford protection from the elements that isn't ridiculously expensive. You know, all these things that are standard human needs, but the very, very bottom rung, the very, very foundations. Clean water, clean air, real food, and shelter from the wind and from the rain is like very basic, but they're the things that have become like so out of reach for people. And I think because those things have become so out of reach, we then actually forget that humans have so many more needs on top of that, but we feel so stretched in the original four that the way of claiming those things back is to live away from the culture where you can clean up the water, clean up the air, get real food, and have a reasonable price shelter. But you fail to realise that they're just the basics. And what humans really need is social, spiritual, mental, physical needs that take the form of being able to go and watch performances and hear people play music and being able to share things with lots of people, being in relation with quite a few different people in all sorts of ways, growing up in a town where there's a big enough gene pool to be able to find partners and things like that. So that, I don't know, I think if we weren't also under-resourced and also, if the base very, very fundamentals weren't so expensive and so out of reach, we would remember that actually humans have a lot more needs than water, air, food and shelter.
Yeah.
And then we would not maybe rush to live in the woods by ourselves. We'd be like, oh fuck no, I want to be able to go and watch music with a friend, or I want to be able to go and sit in a communal sauna, or I want to go and, I don't know, share food with 20 people because it's a good moon tonight or something, you know, where then maybe things that maybe become a bit more difficult if you're living with one or two people in the middle of nowhere. Not that you can't have those things, you just got to drive or walk a long way. And
yeah, that's fascinating. I just never, and that's interesting. I don't know if you've heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but it kind of almost falls into that, although he doesn't go too much into spirituality, but it makes, I mean, I completely agree with that. But maybe that's what I'm fixated on, because, I'm striving for those basic needs, but don't have the chance to really think about those, those other needs. But, again, I've probably put a block, having spoken to you, and it's the same with my partner. It's very easy to put a block and put blame on where you're living, where actually, when you sit down and think about it, you think, well, it's actually pretty good. Really don't have it, that bad. So it's a strange one. So thanks for that.
It is a strange, and I really resonate with the feeling of wanting to be off grid and in a cabin by myself. That's a reasonable price. I really resonate with that feeling, and that for a lot of people that really feels like in a world of so little control over your own basic human needs, that's a way of controlling that again. And that is safety, and we really need safety. Humans really need safety, and I totally understand why people do that. And a few years ago, if I had the initial investment to be able to do that, I'm sure I would have done that. But just not being able to do that initially has just made me bide my time and think about it on a few more other levels, and neither are perfect right now. And I think the future is both of those things. You can't have everyone living in the town. Nor can you have everyone living in their own community. It really requires both. It really requires both. And I think that different people are tailored to different things. And I'm very fortunate. I love that people love both of those things.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Well, it's definitely stuff for me to think about there, because it's opening up a kind of another way of thinking. I try not to think about it now, because I tend to do that. Then go off on a tangent, so I'll save that for later on. I'll write that down. But I've got just one last question, which may be difficult or easy, I'm not sure. But I think if anyone's listening to this, and I'd obviously implore them to go and watch your videos, and I'll put all the links down below. But if you... I don't want to phrase it so bluntly, but if you, and it doesn't have to be one, but if you had one piece of advice for someone that was perhaps wanting to connect with nature but just don't know how, what would that be for you? Having gone through this process and going through this process, what's your kind of piece of advice?
So it's a funny question, isn't it?
It's difficult. I'd probably put you on the spot, but I'm sure it's not a straightforward question. No. I know that. In fact, I could rephrase it.
My answer's a two-pronged one.
Okay, hit me.
I think so. I think I got it. The first one is that the question is based on the assumption that the person is disconnected, which they're not. The first place to start is that you are connected. You're not severing that tie, even if you tried. By virtue of the fact that you live on this earth and you breathe the air and you eat the plants that grow out of the ground, you are connected. So I think that's the place to start, and that's a bit esoteric. I understand as well, and it's not the most pragmatic thing I could say. So I'm gonna have a pragmatic prong to the answer.
No, I like that though. That's great.
I think I would. This can often get misconstrued, but I'm going to try and say it in the clearest terms I know how. The way that we live at the moment is a blip in human history, and we're We haven't evolved any more over the last 200 in the last few thousand years than we have over the last few 100,000 years. So we're biologically the same. And I think just remembering that for the vast majority of human history, for way more than you could possibly think of, humans lived outside, humans lived like without all the things we consider necessary now. And then you could go, oh, well, they all died young, they didn't enjoy their lives, whatever, which I think is worth investigating as well. But just remember that humans wouldn't have got to this place where we are today unless we had high survival rate, unless we did well, And so there is a way to thrive, not in the modern context. And we don't need all the luxuries we think we need right now to live in a thriving global community. So just, I think, remembering that and picturing yourself living in a more original, primal way, and knowing that you are capable of that because that's what you have actually evolved to do. For me, that was the story that runs in the background of my head. That's the story that knows that I know I can run barefoot because that's what humans do. I know I have the capacity to learn about wild food because that's what humans do. I know I have the capacity to live in a harmonious community because that's what humans do. And it always comes back to that for me. It's like we've done this for much longer than we have.
Yeah. Again, really great way of. I don't know if you know that you do it. Maybe you're just a natural born storyteller, but the way of wording things is fantastic. And like you corrected me on phrasing that question, that we haven't lost a connection. It's just really. I just love the way that you put things into, you kind of turn it around and you say, well, there isn't a disconnect. It's there. That's the first thing you're kind of going wrong with. The connection's there. And then it's just amazing how simple that is. I mean, the first part of your answer, how simple and powerful that is to just something clicks in your brain and goes, oh my fucking God, yeah. But it's
there's no problem to solve when you think something.
That's it. It's just this kind of light.
There's nothing to try to do.
Holy shit! Yeah, I'm putting up this wall, but it's not there. Like and
a lot of problems are that, I think.
Yeah,
a lot of problems are that.
Yeah, you're right.
The narratives that run in your head are create the block. A lot of people ask me a lot of questions. I kind of get asked are similar along those lines. I live in a city. How can I be more connected? And it's different for everyone, but it's just that you don't become more connected by spending more time in nature. To me, it's a direct path. It can kind of happen instantly. You just connect. I suppose you can strengthen a connection, maybe. So maybe I'll go back on what I just said. Then maybe you can deepen that relationship. But just by virtue of the fact that you're a human, that you're alive on this planet, it's deep enough. You can find it. You might have a few layers to punch through, but you can find it.
Yeah. That's really nice, man. That's fantastic. You've given me a lot to think about, which I wasn't expecting. I've written a few notes down.
I wasn't expecting that either.
That's great, man. It's brilliant. I really appreciate that.
No, I really appreciate you having me on here, man.
Matt, thank you so much. Honestly, it's been a pleasure speaking to you, and I'd like to go into more depth, but I'm trying to keep them to 40 minutes, so doing not too badly. 40 minutes over.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, it was always going to go into depth. But thank you so much, Seth. I'll put all of your links below so that people can see. Actually, just quickly, the last thing, because I'm intrigued. I don't know if you can, but you're starting a YouTube channel.
I think so. Yeah.
Have you got any ideas that you want to share about that, or is it on the lowdown?
Yeah, maybe. No, I don't think any of it's on the lowdown. I think I just want to explore in more detail some of the things I've been talking about, and some of the topics in my head. I don't feel it would take an absolute wizard to be able to rationalize them down into 1 minute and get your point across. So I think I'm going to just not even try that and just go a bit more long form. But I'm also toying with the idea of whether they even need to have much of a video element, whether I could just sit in front of a camera and talk sometimes, whether I actually have to go go to the lengths of like filling it out with the cinematography side as well? I don't know.
It's a very difficult one, isn't it, man? And certainly from a filmmaking perspective, I guess there's an element of making it sustainable, and I think the level of your short form content is such a high level to then translate.
It's quite unsustainable.
It is. I mean, to be able to, not that you need to be putting content out consistently, but it's that they're to make something like that into 10, 15, 20, half an hour, whatever, it's a hell of a lot of work and planning and editing and mental.
I think that's what's put me off up until that point.
Yeah,
that's one of the reasons I haven't done it, because I'm like, oh shit, that's a big task.
Yeah, but then you find yourself, it's tricky because my YouTube channel, I mean, I'm ashamed of it from a cinematography point of view. There isn't.
Really?
I made a conscious decision not to, because it needed to be sustainable, and I just wanted to put information out rather than it be some kind of beautiful, visual kind of thing. And I've struggled with that certainly from a filmmaking perspective. I'm kind of like, so there's an element for me that's not enjoyable.
I can imagine
I'm just putting out crap, like in terms of visually,
criticizing
it's just
your
horrible.
own cinematography.
Yeah, so this other channel I'm starting is like, okay, there's going to be a bit of an element of a little bit of production value, but it can't be much. It needs to be above what it is now. So I've got a bit of enjoyment, but again, it's got to be sustainable. So I can see that from your point of view. But yeah, I mean, to be honest, you've got a great way of talking and conveying things. And I guess, it is, to make it sustainable, maybe it is just the talking, piece to camera and doing it that way, because that is at least a bit more sustainable, and then maybe interjecting it with some longer form videos when you've got the time to do that. But it's a really fine balance, because you want to, it's tricky, isn't it? But whenever it does come, I'm already subscribed, but I'm thoroughly looking forward to it, man, because I think the longer form stuff will be great to watch. I think a lot of people they get a huge amount of value out of your social stuff anyway, but I think I'm super excited about the longer form stuff. I think that's going to be no pressure. I mean,
No, it's actually, to be honest, I've been making a video today that I've had a script written for a longer form version for ages, and I've been shooting it as short form, as just for an Instagram one. I was like, I'm not going to do the long form one, and maybe this has tipped me over the edge to commit maybe to the long form one.
I think it's got so much potential. I think people will get so much value from it. I think it's worth doing. But you've got a great. It seems that you know your stuff, and you better than anyone else. So when the time's right, it will happen. It doesn't need to be forced. But I think there's a lot of people that will be looking forward to that for sure. So I mean, you've already got subscribers having not really done anything on YouTube, so that's
it's quite funny, isn't it?
It's already people
are like preemptively. I think that's where the pressure comes from a little bit. I'm like, oh shit, I've actually got to do something now. I've said I'm going to do it. No, but I've been, the last few weeks has been a bit of like tying up some loose ends from some of my older projects. So I haven't had the capacity to make much other than short form content or just do quite simple stuff, and it won't be long now, I don't think, till I'm can be like kind of 100% committed to this stuff, which is really the place I want to be at, and where I can wake up in the morning and not have to edit a different video. I can edit or just start writing scripts of the things I want to make, and I don't think that's far off right now. And I think I've been saving my long form content for them, because I don't want to, if I'm going to make a 15-minute video, I'm going to treat that like making a film and probably spend a few weeks on it. And
I think that's I think you take the same approach that you did, and I mean I don't want to speak too soon, but I think it's pretty much guaranteed success. But yeah, Seth, thank you so much for joining, man. It's been a pleasure chatting, and hopefully we can do this again once I've kind of digested some of your points, and then I definitely want to think about a few of them, and then I'll come back to you with a few more questions that I've got. But I really appreciate it, man, and thanks for being on the podcast.
Yeah, man, I really appreciate having me on. It's great to connect again, and I look forward to seeing you in person as well soon, and checking out your cabin.
The Off-Grid Path podcast.